welcome to this afternoon's sort of webinar on Zoom from NWorld and NWorld Executive Search. My name is Robert England. I'm one of the executive practice leaders here in the Executive Search team and representative of the NWorld group. Joining us today are Tove Kinooka and Gavin Dixon from our partnership at Global Perspectives. And they'll talk a little bit about who they are in a bit. Just a point of order for today. As you can see, it's about people. So we're going to be focusing on the people element of sustainability today. And we'll look at, of course, as the title says, some key trends and things that we've noted this year and what we see for the future in 2022. Next slide, please. If we can consider this is a webinar only, so everyone is muted. It's not, we don't want to hear you, but I think it's definitely going to help. But there will be opportunities for people to ask questions through the Q&A. So if you do have questions outside of what we're discussing, we will endeavour to answer all questions during this or in the Q&A roundup at the end. And if not, then we'll definitely follow up with any questions that have been asked as our follow-up to this. Okay. So without further ado, I think, well, I've talked a little bit about myself. Obviously from NWorld and NWorld Japan, as you can see, one of the things about enabling success. And this goes very, very nicely into some of the themes that have been happening within the world of green jobs, I suppose we could call it, sustainability, and we'll talk about that throughout this conversation. Also joining me today, as I mentioned, is Tove and Gavin. So Gavin Dixon, one of the founders at Global Perspectives. Gavin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Like Rob said, my name is Gavin Dixon, co-founder and director of Global Perspectives. And just an overview of what we do is we have been focusing almost specifically or entirely on sustainability for about the last 3 or 4 years. And we take a slightly different approach to what you might have heard from most companies. And we're focusing on developing people so that they're ready to change their mindsets, behaviors and actions. And most importantly, what we think is the people are the key to getting the implementation of sustainability into your companies delivered effectively and successfully. So that's what we do. We work on mindsets, behaviors and actions. And we'll move over to Tove.
Okay, hi, so I'm Tove Kinooka. As it says on the slide there, co-founder with Gavin and director of Global Perspectives. And we're really excited about this partnership with NWorld Executive Search because for us, as Gavin said, we focus on the people side of sustainability, helping companies build their capability in that area to support their strategies and ambitions. And of course, a big part of that is making sure you've got the right people in place. So it makes a lot of sense for us to be partnering with NWorld on this. So very happy to be with you today.
Great. Thank you, guys. And really looking forward to discussing those things and obviously how we then tick into everything that's going on. So just for those people, again, just to make sure we're going to review the key trends that we've seen this year. And the opportunities for 2022. There will be a Q&A session later. And again, without harking too much on about it, as you can see, or as you've seen over this year, there have been some very big events to which sustainability has and ESG has been associated. Just if we almost forgotten the Olympics, but obviously there was the Olympics and everything around that. We've recently just seen the COP26. This came out, so it's bringing up all the issues around sustainability. But again, just to emphasize, we're going to talk about the people that are involved in helping provide companies put those projects in place to enable companies to meet these ESG demands, whether they are mandated as opposed from the FSA and JFSA documentation that you may have seen and we can provide after this, to just getting your own projects underway and your sustainability programs, hopefully with Tove and Gavin's help, and we'll support as where we can. Just to kick off, I saw something this week actually, from someone I've got to know very well. I'm not going to mention names or anything, but this person recently has moved on with personal and family to a new opportunity. But one of the things that they mentioned as they left their company is that when they started their actual job in 2009, ESG was not even spoken about, and it wasn't something that was on the horizon. And this person was given an opportunity which he took with two hands, and really with limited I suppose experience, was able to develop over time to a point now where she was a director for sustainability and able to work on things like climate change with the government. And I just thought it was a wonderful story that this person had been given not only the opportunity, but the trust and the backing from the company, which I think is so important, and really driven and taken the opportunity in great strides, self-learning, qualifying to such a point that they were able to deliver on a very good promise to their business. So I just thought that would be interesting. That was an interesting start. So, as you heard from the beginning, I think both Tove and Gavin are very heavily involved in helping companies with their people, and perhaps a little bit of insight as to what you guys do on a day-to-day would be interesting, and what you're then seeing or what you've seen, I suppose, this year. If you could touch on a couple of points, Gavin or Tove.
I'll let Tove go first.
Okay, thank you. So interesting. I mean, as you said, Rob, this has been a huge year, I think, for sustainability. We've seen an acceleration of awareness, I think, a sense of urgency building that wasn't there, a couple of years ago at all. It really has shifted up several gears this year. And that's meant that companies are looking for opportunities around this. They're feeling a lot of obligations as well. And we've seen that reflected in the work that we're doing and the requests that are coming in from companies. So, for example, we've had companies coming to us that are non-Japanese organizations, international companies, gaishike, that have got global level strategies that are coming into Japan and saying, okay, well, or have been here for some time, but are suddenly getting pressure from outside to say, okay, we need to up our game seriously on this. We can't sort of think about it as a nice to have anymore. Sustainability needs to be up front and center, embedded into everything we do. And that's proving very challenging for a lot of organizations. And sort of on the reverse of that, we've also been working this year, for example, with a large Japanese company that was getting pressure from their European operations to really push forward on the sustainability agenda, because they're getting pressured in turn from their consumers on the environmental sustainability particularly. So that's really pushed things forward very, very rapidly. For example, any company that's operating in Europe or based in Europe is going to be very aware of the fact we've got mandatory due diligence on human rights and environmental issues sort of coming in. The draft has been agreed now. So things are moving fast, and that's putting a lot of pressure on companies to really move from doing it at the sidelines to bringing it into the center of what they do.
Thanks.
And if I can add to that one, Tove, that's okay. One of the things that we've noticed in the past, like we said, we started this quite a while ago, and we were basically banging on a lot of closed doors. But what came about in 2020, particularly, and moving into 2021, and this may or may not have been a consequence of COVID, was that a lot of sustainability departments were sort of almost external to normal business operations. They were way out past HR, if you will, if we put it in that honest thing. Now we're seeing them really being incorporated into every line of business. But one of the big challenges is actually having the right people in the right place with the right skill set and the right mindset. And that's been one of the big changes. I suppose you could add on top of that, that moving from that point of not really being engaged to it, what we saw at the beginning of this year was a lot of almost fear within organizations about what should we do and how should we do it and who should we do it with. And I think we can all agree that actually as this year's moved forward to where we are now in December, is that the fear's almost gone away now. Now it's an acceptance of this is what we have to do. And now companies are looking for solutions. And so you can actually see this sort of change over time where it's gone from that fear stage to, okay, here we are, now we have to do it, and solutions are coming up. The big challenge that we've also seen, I think, and Tove agree or disagree on this one, is that actually a lot of companies have either gone in with big strategies and big ideas and senior leadership is really bought in. But when it comes to implementing the set strategies, what a lot of companies are finding is there's a lack of awareness or engagement as we move further down the organizations. And let's be honest, they're the people that really make the difference in getting the strategies implemented. And that's where I think we're seeing coming out of 2021 into 2022 is the integration all throughout the organizations about these plans and strategies and having to develop people to be able to do that. I think that's one of the big things that's come around in 2021.
And maybe related that, reflecting the same question back to you, Rob, because I know, I mean, the changes we've seen have been very much from the sort of the internal perspective, if you like, looking at, you know, what is happening inside the company already with the people that are there. But I mean, what are the shifts that you've seen in the recruiting space this last sort of year or so?
Yeah, thanks, Tove. I think there's so many changes, and I think some of them are big and in your face, and some of them are just sort of crept up on you. One of the things I'm referring to, I think, is if you look at any company website now, it's nearly every single one, without exception, has a sustainability piece, which is very clear. Now, some of it is fantastic, and it's so well done. You think, wow, you know, this company's amazing, but a lot of it is being driven from overseas. And you mentioned earlier, you know, if you're in Europe or in the US, then there's sort of advanced stages of their sustainability programs, particularly in companies. But I think globally, you know, they're rolling out things, which I think now we're beginning to see, and where we see for the future is that companies in Japan then are trying to sort of Japanify them and make these sustainability programs fit for their company in Japan. And then as a result of that, start bringing on people or having individuals more responsible for those particular roles. And I think that's what we've seen driven this year. So an increase in not only the number of roles in sustainability from bottom to the top, and more importantly, the level of those, of the increased level of seniority of those positions. We haven't yet seen the dominance of a CSO, a corporate sustainability officer, in all companies. And of course, some of the smaller companies wouldn't justify it maybe at this point. But I know at Nissan, for example, has a CSO. They're, you know, big company, you would expect that all the big companies would have a CSO either actually designated or as a part of their role. And then to that point, we've seen a few more specialized roles increase. And as I mentioned, up until recently, a lot of the roles that were within sort of what was used CSR or in environmental health and safety has now become more over not just HR plus D&I, but they become sustainability specialists. And there's growing demand in that area too. So that's what we've seen right now. So reflect back to you guys then. I mean, on when you're talking to your clients and the projects that you might be in on, are you seeing enough people that are qualified to be able to run these projects?
Can I jump in there, Tove?
Go for it. Yeah.
One of the really interesting thing comes up at the very beginning of that process is actually understanding what qualified is and how that fits into, you know, what sort of skill set do we actually need? And then out of that, what is the necessary qualifications, whether that be experience or paperwork or what that is. And that's one of those real interesting starting points. I think that's at every level of the organization, I think. I presume that's the same what you're hearing, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely on the experience front. And if you think of any, obviously a lot of what we're talking about is project management, the sort of growth of project management. And with any project management, if you have a level of seniority to be able to deal with those, senior leadership, where there should be, in this case, a lot more buy-in than you would expect, but there's still, how is this really benefiting me? And if you've got somebody of a senior ilk who's able to break down those barriers at senior level and drive the message home, it's a lot easier than if you've got some very sort of energetic junior person with all the passion, but hasn't been in the company long enough. And that tended to be the trend, in 2020. But this year we've seen a few more those people have grown, obviously, with experience. The implications of what they need to do has become a lot more serious. So it's been given a little bit more, it's given more interest by the companies. But having said that, when you've got a director level person being hired to run a sustainability program, that shows the intent of that company. And then, the people within that, can they grow those people? Can they train those people up? I mentioned something about, I read something the other day about providing a green team within your business. I mean, those things are beginning to happen. But I think, the seniority side of things is definitely an area where we've seen perhaps the most interesting and hopeful trend, particularly for the recruitment industry.
Well, it's interesting adding on to that. One of the things that we've seen is that in the initial conversations is it don't necessarily look for a sustainability qualification, but look for transferable skills. And actually, with a lot of the programs we've done is we've been working across the whole different organizations, so different departments and cross sectors. And what's become very apparent is that you don't necessarily need a specific sustainability person in that role, although that is helpful. But if you start developing the whole organization and everyone within there, giving them the skills, the mindsets and the behaviors, then it's amazing what happens. It really, really is. And so you're sort of coming from a very small group out in the marketplace of sustainability experts. What we're seeing is that if you actually give the people within your organization the opportunity, give them some space to develop, give them the tools to be able to develop, and a lot of people are really, really happy to do it themselves. And I'd say sustainability expert on their business card, but they're all doing that across the organization. So, I mean, you might want to expand on that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to sort of connect into what Rob was saying earlier. It was interesting, Rob, you mentioned that, you started off with the quote from your connection who had sort of moved into this sustainability role, although he hadn't been in it in the past, but was actually being really successful. And I think we've seen that in a few of the clients that we've worked with over the last couple of years, where as long as you've got somebody at the top who has at least enough influence and enough experience within the organizations to make things happen, that is going to be really, really crucial. They've got to have, be executive level or be directly connected in there and have that experience, but they don't need to have all of the sustainability knowledge themselves. And we've seen some really interesting examples where, as long as you've got those key people in place, you can build the team of experts around. So as Gavin was saying, obviously there'll be some sort of people at different levels who come in, have the passion, perhaps don't yet have the knowledge or experience, but they can work on building that. But there are also teams we've seen where the person leading the team has been very aware of the fact that they don't know all of the sustainability is a huge topic. There are many, many different aspects to it. Nobody is really an expert in all of it, or very few people that I'm aware of. But they can then bring in a team and say, okay, we need somebody who really understands ESG's reporting. Let's go and look for an expert in that, and they take the lead on that part. We really need somebody who understands human rights and everything related to that. Right, let's bring someone in on that part. So as long as you've got the person at the top who is able to recognize that, able to build that team and connect all the dots, then I think that's what's really we're seeing to be very effective.
Yeah, and I think on that you've raised a couple of points around human rights, for example. I mean, in the recruitment side of things, there's very few agencies that focus only on those types of roles. And having said that, the qualifications, to Gavin's point, that they don't need to be within that sustainability field. They will actually come from all over. And I've seen sort of examples where people have, because they've come from a finance background, for example, they're used to sort of strict governance rules and regulations in terms of how they report information. Then that sort of mindset and transferability of skill is very, very quick if you go onto the governance side of things on the ESG. But I think the pitfall for a lot of companies is they're trying to find that one person that has all those things. You know, you're a climate expert, you're a lawyer, you're a human rights campaigner, you're an activist, and the sum of each part is probably more than one person. It's probably 3 or 4, or potentially a team. And then for some companies, they don't have that bandwidth to be able to grow it that length. So it is a little bit more challenging, I think, for some.
Well, if I can sort of expand on that too, Rob, one of the things that Tove and I is one of our bugbears is that certainly in 2020 and moving into 2021, most companies were focusing on the processes and getting just the frameworks and all that set up without thinking about who's actually going to use these frameworks to deliver the strategies. So they were focusing on the hardware, if you will, rather than the software of the whole thing. And because there is such a shortage of identifiable, recognizable talent in the marketplace at the moment, I think it's becoming beholden on companies to take a leap and develop people internally, particularly, give them space and be creative about that, and develop that software to run the hardware that's in many companies already have in place. And I think that's where we see some leading companies are actually understanding that point now, but a lot of people are hitting the wall now. So we've got all this stuff, we know we've got all the reporting, we've got all this stuff. How do we do it now? And it's not working. Why? And it's usually because the people further down the chain, particularly I think in the middle management sector, they're the people that are struggling the most in this situation at the moment. They're getting the pressure from the strategy upstairs. A lot of the younger, sort of more junior people are actually engaged, but those people in the middle management who are really focusing on KPIs and that tactical and operational level, they're getting crammed and slammed. And they're pushing back. And I think it's beholden on companies to develop that level of the company as well internally, to give these guys and girls the tools and the mindset and behaviors to be able to implement.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of, when we start talking about trends, I think there's an increased level of opportunity to study environmental and sustainability management, or different sort of degrees, online degrees. I think this year the Cambridge Institute qualification for sustainability, both in leadership and in finance, is something that a lot of people have gone involved in, self-driven, self-educated themselves, and it's turned into a very good thing. And I believe both of you have been part of that institution, I think.
Yes, that's right. We did the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership Sustainability Management Program a couple of 3-4 years ago, I think now, Gav. Time has gone very quickly. And that was a really useful program for building a sort of big picture view and seeing how all the parts fit together. And I know there are a lot of others, I mean, Oxford Said and a lot of the US sort of bigger schools out there as well have some really good programs too. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for people to develop that knowledge, and some interesting sort of specific ones. I mean, you mentioned finance, for example. Very often people see sustainability as a separate thing, that it's difficult to understand how it directly connects into different functions, different roles within the organization. I think for some functions, it's much easier than others, right? If you're working in R&D, for example, or in production, you can see, or operations management, you can very sort of easily find direct connections. But those functions that are a little bit further out from the coalface, so to speak, I think it's harder for them to really see, okay, well, what is the role that we play in this? How do we contribute to our company's sustainability ambitions and strategy? And I think some of those programs out there, specifically for certain functions, can be really, really helpful for that. But more broadly, just I think companies giving their people opportunities. Like one of the programs we had earlier this year with a client, we had people from every different function in the company come together, 30 participants for a program. Everyone from the admin team through to operations to finance to marketing to sales. And they were all digging into really, how does this connect to us? How do we contribute here? And then yesterday, actually, we had the presentations 6 months after the program finished of the projects they've been working on since. And it was really interesting to see the different levels of contribution, and everything counts, right? This all fits together. An organization is not sort of distinct or shouldn't be distinct functions working independently. They should all be pulling in the same direction and talking to each other. And we saw that really happening. So, some teams there, the project was very much internally focused. It might be on building awareness, highlighting actions in different parts of the company, through to others. The salespeople were going out and engaging with customers on plastic packaging and working, finding solutions together with the suppliers and customers for that. So we saw very different approaches, but we also saw a lot of collaboration between functions and sort of a real understanding of the fact that we all have to work together on this. It's not just the sustainability department's job to make this strategy happen. We all have a role in that.
On top of that, Tove, I think what was really key coming out of that example, but a lot of the other things we've spoken about, is connecting every individual's daily work processes and habits to sustainability, and the fact that it's not, I'm a finance person, I just have to worry about the P&L or whatever that is. It's okay, there's P&L and there's the sustainability component that goes into that. And once people, we find it all the time, and it really doesn't take that long to shift that mindset, is when they can connect their own personal benefit as well as a benefit to the company and potentially to society, but also they can see their place within the broader sustainability framework of the company. It's incredible how people, maybe it's out of, that they're looking after themselves, but they realize just how important this is. And it's incredibly, I don't think in all our years of working in this type of thing, we've never seen shifts this quick when it comes down to that type of mindset shift. And that's really what it comes down to.
Well, that's fantastic. And it's a great example, therefore, of what global perspectives can do for any company and get people sort of aligned very quickly with the company's sustainability goals. Because if everyone's involved, then some of the things we talked about before, and hopefully the trend in 2022 is that, seniority or not, if everyone's engaged, then it's a much easier thing to get going, and the blocks are slightly less. So I think that's a really, really good sort of example. And for people listening who are interested in getting their little plug for you guys, who are interested in getting your sustainability program sort of up and running or tweaked slightly or on board, then please feel free to reach out to Gavin and Tove, because they're doing some fantastic work with companies, and they have capacity to do more, I'm sure.
Thank you.
So if we sort of summarize so far, because we talked about trends that we've seen, if I sort of summarize what we've seen sort of obviously an increase awareness and exposure to sustainability and ESG, which has resulted in and actioned for more seniority of jobs, increased number of jobs first of all, but then the increased seniority of jobs, which for us is from an executive search point of view has been very good. I think we've seen a tendency for people to give more people opportunity, or need to give people opportunity. And one of the notes I've got down here is that obviously the Gen Z group, the under 25s, they're the ones that are most passionate about this, and obviously they have the most sort of skin in the game, if you will, to make sure that things do go well, because they're going to be left with the effects of everything in the future. So there was a survey done in the US, just to say that, on the campus of the Southern California University, and 64% of them were interested. 32% of them have been involved in environmental campaigns, and 33% of them actually practice what they preach. So you've got these young people with enthusiasm coming into companies and giving them the opportunity to go through. They're self-educating themselves if they're not already educating themselves anyway in environmental. So you're getting an influx of passionate, qualified people who have limited experience. And again, to Gavin's point, we're seeing a lot of sort of pivot happening at career stage, senior people utilizing their skills in a different way and utilizing their seniority in the business to enable these projects to get up and running and drive the campaigns in each of the businesses. We've also seen a highlight in the sustainability sort of website documents, and everyone's pushing that. Obviously, we've seen then an increase in new products, which has grown new market. I think there was a couple of reporting. I know that our friend Paul over at SAP is talking about their new reporting sort of software that will enable companies to be able to do it. Diginex is another company that's come through with all kinds of report technology. So I think we're seeing, as a result of this technology, it's going to result in more people opportunity within the market. So it's only a good thing from that side of things, and it is hopefully going to allow companies to be a bit more they're going to need to be a bit more transparent of how they report, and then accountability will come into that as well. So that's kind of I know it's a very quick history, but I think there's a lot of things going in there.
Yeah.
So for the future, obviously more of the same, but what other things do we feel are going to drive in the 2022? What are we looking at? Tove?
Well, I think thanks, Rob, for the summary. That there is an awful lot going on, isn't there? It's interesting. So your question actually relates directly to a question that's just come in from one of the listeners, and saying, talking about next gen leaders. And I think something that, you've already talked about Gen Z, for example, and the fact that, Gavin was saying a lot of the middle managers particularly are feeling that pressure, right? People are coming on board to the company and saying, well, I want to contribute. What's this company doing? What are we doing? What's my team doing? And how can you support me to do that? And if they're not getting that support within the organization, they're going to pretty quickly move elsewhere. I mean, we all know here, the market, the workforce is shrinking. It's getting really, really competitive. And I think that's going to continue, and companies really, really need to be aware of how they can attract the next gen talent to them. And I think one of the things they can do is providing opportunities for them to feel as though they're really being involved and listened to in meaningful work. So, for example, the One Young World program that we've been working with some of our clients with over recent years is a big sort of young Davos, they used to call it, not so much now. I think that's lost its shiny allure. But the One Young World program brings together senior business leaders, politicians, activists, but also an incredible group of young leaders from around the world. It's coming to Japan in May 2022, and I think there's an opportunity there for a lot of organizations to really support their younger leaders, but that needs the support for that needs to come from the top of the organization. They need to be providing these opportunities for younger people to move up, and it's got to be, as well as cross-functional, we've talked a bit about that, but cross-generational as well. These conversations need to be happening at multiple levels, and sort of horizontally and vertically within the organization. I think that's going to become more and more apparent as we move forward.
And interesting to add on to that, I think that there is now an understanding at senior leadership that they do need to lean on the younger people in organisations a lot more, that we have seen a big transition in the last few years about that. When we started this program 3 years ago, it was almost just a nice little thing to have, a bit of a reward. We went off to the Netherlands and then London the year after. What we're finding now, particularly with our major client around this, is actually we are getting support way up from the top of leadership, and actually a large percentage of the participants in that program, their working week will be devoted to this new program to develop on the global stage. So you're seeing that shift, I think, Senior leadership now is starting to understand that they don't have all the answers, and they've got to look throughout the organisation, all the way down to the younger generations, to be able to support them and give them the responsibility. I think that's one of the key things that companies need to start thinking about. And COVID has probably shown us that actually can give your staff and your team members responsibility. They can go home, and actually in many cases productivity is increased. And this is the same around sustainability. I think you can draw direct parallels, particularly to the younger people. Give them the responsibility and the support, and they will go and perform probably above and beyond expectations of what you would have measured them on in previous years. So I think that's a good look at it.
Well, I think that's where the challenge comes for some of the big sort of either Japanese companies or companies that are based on that meritocracy ageist sort of timeline, to see if you give somebody a good opportunity. And to that point, I mean, just as you're talking, you realize that there have been a lot of sort of startup businesses that have been very successful within the sustainability thing, that are driven by young, enthusiastic, entrepreneurial people, and their workforce is very, very geared around the younger generation. So those are inspirational. And if I think about the type of candidates that are interested, and not just interested in sustainability jobs, but they're interested in moving their careers, especially, they tend to be very talented, very bilingual, very gifted female candidates that are showing all that energy and enthusiasm and want and will. And you just need to be able to give them an opportunity. And a lot of them within their current companies are taking hold of those opportunities, even though it's not their main role, but they're saying, I want to give me this project, and they're leading with it. So if you can enhance that energy and put it into particular work, then I think, we've definitely got a pool of talent which is growing and educating itself, either formally or on the fly, like most people, I think. But
Rob, I think to add on to that, if you don't do that, they will go and just set up their own startups.
Yeah.
You're going to lose all that talent, and they're seeing a lot of that, I think.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm conscious of the time. We summarize sort of where we feel things have gone. I think the future is going to be, without sort of giving an easy answer, there's going to be more of the same. And I think this, we mentioned right at the beginning, without overdoing the FSA, JFSA sort of mandates, but the mandates will start to make the opportunities much more real. They're going to have to deal with the mandated directives, in which case they can't just play around with, oh, this person can do that on the side. They need to have somebody specific, especially doing those roles and making sure that they are compliant and accountable to what they're doing. So that I see is just a general view of 2020 vision. Anything specific from you guys? And I know there's, the question that came in from Steve, thank you. I think we answered most of that.
Rob, about ESG, if I can jump onto that question now, should we get to that now?
Yes.
Okay, so Buzzark has asked a question we often come up again. ESG connects much more easily with certain functions daily rather than others across the organisation. And it's more, at the moment, he says similarly, it connects more easily to certain industries, and that's true, particularly those that are based around supply chains. A lot of companies, particularly in the consulting or in the service sectors, are finding ESG a little bit harder. But do you have any specific best practices advice for the companies in the latter group which want to drive ESG more proactively? So if we're thinking about particularly the service industries, I think one of the things that's starting to become very apparent about ESG, environment, social and governance, is that in the past it was seen as an external obligation that was just about reporting. And once you did your ESG reporting, that was the end of the conversation and went back to doing your normal work. The way of engaging people around ESG is understanding that ESG now is really a long process that affects every part of the business. And yes, it is a part of the reporting, but then out of that reporting, then there has to be action derived and implemented. And that's when you're really starting to see that change. And this is where companies are really starting to find it difficult, because they might have ESG reporting specialists, but they don't have anyone in the organization that's aware or have the skills and the knowledge to be able to implement what comes out of ESG. So But that's what I would be thinking. It's looking at ESG as a long-term process, not just a reporting process. And then thinking about finding the people within the organizations that can link the reporting to verifiable KPIs and return on investment about business outcomes that comes from the ESG component. So it's linked to every layer of the company.
And just maybe to add on a little bit there in response to Bashak's question. So as you said, it's very easy, if you're looking at a physical product to map out, say, the life cycle of that product and think about, how is it impacting people and planet before it's, comes to the consumer, after it's, finished its usable life and things like that. That is harder with service industries, but it's also important to think about not just the product that or the service that you're selling, but to think about how is that impacting people, how is it being received by them, and to look at the social impact around that of the immediate consumer, the communities, the society around it. You can start again to map out impact like that and look at where is impacting well, and where could you potentially have a more positive impact, or are there any negative sort of knock-on effects that you hadn't perhaps recognized. So if you can zoom out and look at where your service fits in people's lives, in the business systems, then you can begin to understand the impact of it there. But also, every company, no matter what it is that you provide, has a physical impact as well. We all have a carbon footprint, for example. We all have, diversity and inclusion policies, hopefully, within our organizations. And we need to be thinking about those, about the well-being of our employees as well. So for those service industries, yes, you can look outside at the impact of your services. But I think it's also really important as part of your ESG processes, as Gav was saying, to think long-term and think about, okay, so our physical office space, what's the impact of that? What's our footprint? How much are we traveling to go and visit clients, and do we need to be doing that? How, what are our practices and culture at the moment around the people in our organizations, and how are we supporting them? Could we do better on that? So you can look internally as well as externally on that.
Yeah, I was doing some research on this, and there's an article that came up breaking things down into the ESG bit that you've done nicely there, Tove. And I think that, obviously with the pandemic, there's been a focus on mental and health and welfare. You've mentioned sort of the carbon footprint on the environmental side and social, how gender and diversity has been a big thing continually and will continue right through next year and beyond, of course. Mental health and concerns about that because of the pandemic. From the governance, there's an interesting thing that's coming up in terms of how the board and board directors are made up. And again, with the FSA or mandates around stock exchange companies and having females in the board. There's a lot of drive there. We've seen executive compensation that's been talked about, hiring, onboarding, best practices as part of how that will all come. So I think it's not a simple answer, but generally speaking, next year is going to be more of the same, but more focus, because everyone's more aware of it now, and it's really gathering some steam. So I can the article that I found, I can send out post this event as well. But nice question. Are there any more questions?
There's one question just come up around global CO2 emissions. Thank you for the question, Steve. I think it sort of relates much more to the company's sort of actual output. We're talking more about the people today, but of course, Steve has asked, 50% of global CO2 emissions come from Asian countries. What specific impact would we like to see Asian companies have in the coming 3 to 5 years to offset that? And of course, it'd be wonderful to see companies setting much more ambitious targets on CO2 reductions. But that again comes back to them understanding the need to go beyond the bare minimum. And that requires a mindset shift within the organization. So I think it's beginning to happen. We've been working with, as I said, a large Japanese company earlier this year to help them set targets around carbon and human rights and other things as well. But it was interesting that, you know, the conversation started of what are our competitors doing? What's the minimum we need to be doing? And we had a lot of quite challenging conversations at the beginning, but they got easier as we went forward to get them to take a longer term view and say, okay, well, in the short term, yes, this is the minimum we need to do. How can we make those cuts quickly? How can we offset potentially, but, you know, better still look for ways that we can reduce our real carbon output, but also just getting them to think, you know, way beyond that. How can we take the lead here? Not can we just, you know, be compliant for now, but this carbon emissions is not going to drop overnight, even if everyone turns off everything, right now. This is going to take time. So companies really need to be taking a long-term view, and that requires a real commitment and understanding at the top level of organizations to really see what needs to be done and to be brave enough to set those big targets.
And then to that point, I think it's companies need to look internally into the untapped human potential within their organization to find the solutions that might not necessarily be apparent right now. But if you are going to get into these really 50% cuts, this is going to take a whole new paradigm, a different way of thinking about business productions and services. And the first step is to look inside and give people the responsibility in the space and and development so that they can come up with some of those ideas. That's what I think one of the big challenges of companies now is actually saying, okay, this is what almost seems like an overwhelming scenario to be in. First, look inside and tap into that that untapped potential that you have within, because you will very much be surprised what people are thinking and what some ideas they have inside.
Yeah,
if you give them the space.
All right. Well, Gavin and Tove, as predicted, the time has run very quickly. And it's now coming to the end of our sort of 45-minute allocation. For those joining and for the questions, fantastic. Thank you for joining. And you know, we probably haven't covered half of what we could have, but the intention is that we will be following up, and there'll be not it's like a crystal ball prediction. There will be more of these discussions in 2022. On your screen, you'll see we had a sort of a quick poll survey this week, and just interesting. You know, does your company have sustainability strategy? And 86% of them said yes, which is good, but 10% of them no, and I think 4% of them not sure. I think one thing is knowing that they've got a strategy. The other thing is understanding what it is and how you are actually part of that and how that affects you. In terms of sustainability action, how do you think your company compares to other companies? Well, 80% said, well, they need to catch up with the competitors. 50% of them said a company in good place. So that's not bad. 32% has a leader in that position. That's an area that we can definitely help on. And I think over the next year, we'll see some improvement in that area too. The last thing for me, obviously, we've done quick Q&A. It's a big thanks to Tove and Gavin for your support and partnership through this year, and hopefully continuing through 2022 and beyond. A quick thank you for everyone who joined us today. I think there's a note going around. There's a short survey of questions that will come out to you, and that will help us set up for next year. We'll run a couple of different events early in the first part of the year. If you do have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me, to Gavin or Tove directly. We'll make sure we can answer those questions. And I suppose the last thing, thanks to the marketing team at N-World, Sherry and Nanai, for doing a great job of helping us organize this. And I suppose I haven't done this yet, but I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everybody. I hope it's a prosperous and safe New Year, although not sure what Omicron is going to develop. I know the pharmaceutical companies are rubbing their hands with glee. Let's see if we can get through next year unscathed. Take care, everybody. Thank you again. Speak to you soon.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone.